The playoffs are over, and the 4 teams that will continue on to the Overwatch League Grand Finals have been decided. Who made it, and how did they get there? That's coming up on today's Owl's Nest. Welcome back to our regular viewers, and hello to any newcomers. This is your first time visiting the Owl's Nest. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and like the video. Make sure that bell is turned on for notifications. So it seems like the longest of seasons, but we have finally made it here. The end of the playoffs. All that we have left now is the grand finals, but getting here had more than a few surprises. Now, where I'd like to start with, Jake, is actually the Shock versus the Philadelphia Fusion. This is probably one of the biggest matches of the playoffs, and now one that we may see going into the grand finals as well. What was it here that you saw that allowed the Shock ultimately to come out on top, despite being the second seed in the playoffs here?
I think what it came down to, in my eyes, was largely the fact that Shock could stand toe-to-toe with Philly on what had looked like in all the other matches was Philly's best comp, the comp that no other team could beat them on. I think probably the biggest surprise in that regard was Ons on the Sombra. I mean, he had an incredibly fast EMP charge time. I believe it was the fastest in all of playoffs, which is pretty incredible when you consider what this guy came to the team for, what he was, signed and scouted for, to be this Widowmaker backline hitscan specialist, and then now it happens that he has an insane top tier Sombra as well. So obviously the rest of the team had to play really well around him. No one player could beat Philly, but they definitely rose to that occasion. And I think with Ons having that kind of performance on a hero he's not at all known for, it just shows the level of potential and talent that player has.
This was the match where we had, just within, I think, the first match, wasn't there something like 3 simultaneous EMPs that ended up canceling some of them out?
Yeah, exactly. So what that meant, in my eyes, watching the match, was that both Sombras are going for that play specifically, because generally when that happens, it's the timing game of who gets it off first. Like there's the guessing game of you want an EMP, get a useful EMP, hit some enemy players, but if you just stand around and wait for the enemy Sombra and your timing is just a little bit better, if you pop it right when she comes out of Invis, then she's going to get canceled every time. And the fact that both players are attempting that really high risk, high reward play, I think just shows how close these teams are and how competitive that match really was. Because you won't attempt that if you're confident, if you're extremely confident, right? You attempt that because you need to make a big play to turn the fight.
Now, obviously, with both Philly and San Francisco going to the grand finals, we will eventually get to what that might end up looking like, but we have a few other matches here to talk about as well. And of course, I think the big one that was on everyone's mind, the huge storyline going through most of the playoffs here, was the Justice and their incredible run. 3-0ing just about every team they went up against, except obviously for the Shock, who sent them to the losers bracket. But even down there, the Florida Mayhem, who you had actually thought, when we had talked last week, thought that Florida might be the ones to come out on top of the Justice here. Why do you think that the Justice, while playing the same comp every time, were able to maintain the momentum that they did going through so many matches?
I think it just came down to the level of play from the Justice, and with them being so consistent on the heroes they're playing and on the strategy they're playing, that it was really up to other teams to step up to beat them. And we saw that in the Shock game, where of course Justice did get some maps, but then Shock kind of turned it around and figured things out, and then just started to win really consistently. And then in the Philly game, where it was just extremely one-sided, where Philly had this figured out. But they, to Washington's credit, Philly had to come with a whole new strategy with the Sigma Roadhog. They had to come with prepared usage of the May. They had plans specifically to beat the Washington Justice, and I think that was what everyone else didn't think was necessary. A lot of people thought, you can just beat them playing some standard stuff and playing it really well. But I think what Philly, Shock to a lesser extent, but Philly mostly proved is okay, if you really want to beat these guys, you need to have a strategy tailored to answer that, because they are so good at what they're playing. You can't just expect to, throw something standard at the wall and hope it sticks, because their execution and their preparation is just a little too good for something obvious and straightforward. You have to be ready with an inventive counter.
Well, I think it's something that we've seen, over the past few seasons as well. There have been some teams that, depending on the meta, have, come and gone into the top, but the teams that constantly stay there are the ones who can adapt to the meta and don't just have to rely on comfort picks. So I guess, one of the questions that I have for you now is, do you think that the reason that Philly were able to take down the Justice was, they had a bunch of matches to be able to kind of look at, they had time to tailor, a counter comp. Do you think that if the Fusion would have faced the Justice earlier on in the playoff brackets, that we would have seen the same outcome?
No, I mean, I think what the only reason a team like the Philly Fusion at the top seed and coming into playoffs would be countercopying the Justice is because the Justice have proved themselves like way beyond expectations by the time they got to face Philly. Like, I think the reason Justice beat so many other teams is not because those other teams weren't capable of figuring out the counter comp. It's that they just didn't think Justice were that big of a threat. They didn't realize how difficult it would be to beat them in their wheelhouse comp, right, on their best maps, where they're picking some of the maps in the series, and they're still good on the other maps. So I think it was really a matter of earning respect. And by the time they're playing Philly, it's like, okay, it's pretty obvious you need to be scared of this team if they're the last, the last three teams alive in NA playoffs. Like, okay, like it gets beyond the point where you can question them anymore. Just where you're at in the standings, you don't really care about what you think of their comp. It's like, no, we're going to prepare for everything because it's, trying to go to Korea here. So I think definitely the teams that faced them early kind of got unlucky, except the Shock also got unlucky, and the Shock just overcame that in the series, which, maybe is the reason they're the ultimate 1 seed.
Yep, and so obviously, at the end of the playoffs, the 1 and 2 seed, the Fusion and the Shock going on to the grand finals. Probably not too surprising in the grand scheme of things. Let's take a look over at the APAC region now. A few surprises here as well. So obviously, to start us off, the Seoul Dynasty took the Dragons all the way to a Game 5. But ultimately, they did end up losing and being sent to the losers bracket. So what did you see in this Dynasty versus Dragons game here?
I think the Seoul Dynasty have certainly risen to the occasion of playoffs. This is like the best Seoul Dynasty performance we've ever seen. Maybe not overall, but for, up against a team like the Dragons, who I don't think are like slumping or anything. It really is. It looks like to me like the Seoul Dynasty are just stepping up in a massive way. I heard from I think one of the Seoul players that they were talking in like a stream or something or a YouTube post, and talked about how the Seoul doesn't prepare backup comps; they just prepare the comp, like the strategy.
Was that Fissure doing a VOD review? Because I feel like I might have saw the same.
I think it was Fissure. Somewhere. I think you're right. Mm-hmm. So, but the point of just like we don't prepare backup strats is actually, I think, a very reasonable way to approach the game, because you just prepare incredibly hard on this one strat that you're confident like can work, and that you just need to execute it right. And Seoul, they've got the players to make very difficult executions work out. Like, they just have incredible mechanical skill across all roles. So, you put a team like that, then maybe if you put it that way, it's like hard to imagine why they weren't successful earlier on in the season. But you got to give them mad respect for going, to map 5 against Dragons, to making it really close, and of course, being the 2 seed.
Mm-hmm. And then obviously Nixel sweeping Guangzhou Charge, who, I feel like recently in these past few weeks, we've seen them at certain points in the season be absolute contenders, absolute powerhouses, but ended up being swept by Nixel in the playoffs. What was it here that gave Nixel, the heads up over the Guangzhou Charge?
I think to a big extent, Guangzhou was incredibly good at specifically the 2-shield comp. Like, they were really had a lot of understanding of that comp, to the point where they could play different DPS, different supports, and still be playing it really well, still be making the subtle adjustments in game plan that you need to fit those other lineups, but still like building around a really confident double shield core, especially with Krong on the Sigma. So the meta shifts, I think, hurt them maybe more than other teams. Not that they're terrible at the other metas, like obviously still a strong team, but for a team like New York that's been around so long and has played so many different metas and just had all those players with so much experience and time, I think this is them sort of reaping those rewards, that they're more prepared for a meta like this that kind of no one could have seen coming. I think with the Roadhog, I don't think anybody. It's like it's a totally first for a meta like this, right? Which is a rare thing in Overwatch. Usually we're just sort of cycling roughly strategies that have been played before. But this is, completely out of left field in terms of preparation. So for a younger team with more younger players, that is more difficult, I think.
Well, speaking out of left field, obviously Nixel then went on to face the Seoul Dynasty, and I don't know, it seems like New York is always the bridesmaid, never the bride. They end up being swept by the Seoul Dynasty 2 here. Where do you think this turnaround suddenly came? You just mentioned Nixel is a team that has played all sorts of different comps. They're masters of all different strategies, and Seoul just kind of plays the one right now. Just has the one plan that they go whole hog into, excuse the pun there. So what was it that the Dynasty had here that managed to sweep Nixel after that commanding victory over the Charge?
I think it does really come down to game plan, and while New York beat the Charge playing some different game plans, I think going up against Seoul was a very different beast. I think Seoul understood this new comp in a much deeper way than Charge, where I think, and maybe New York even lulled themselves into a false sense of security with the win over Guangzhou, thinking, okay, we've got this figured out. But then Seoul comes and they just play it, differently. And when I say play it differently, I mean part of that is execution and their game plan, and part of that is like Prophet having like the most ridiculous Ash game ever and just destroying them in the most ridiculous way. So I think it can't, and Jester being super insane on the Roadhog as well. So I think for Seoul, this was like this is a little bit lucky that New York. I think New York thought they had it figured out, and they just hadn't played against a team that played it like Seoul. And that's sort of the challenge of a new meta, is to be adaptable to what your opponent is doing in the series, not just what comp they're playing and the style they like. It's what are they actually doing right here, right now to win these maps. And that's where I think New York fell a bit flat. They weren't ready to adapt. To be fair, it's part of that. It's just Seoul, like on an individual level, playing at the really, really top tier of what's even possible. Like even for Prophet, I don't think he could repeat a game like that every time.
Well, and looking at the victors on both sides, the San Francisco Shock, the Philadelphia Fusion, and the Shanghai Dragons and the Seoul Dynasty, the Dynasty are going to have to continue to play at that level. Unlike the other three teams, they had a little bit of a rough season getting to where they are, but one thing is for certain, the Grand Finals is going to be some of the best Overwatch that I think we have ever seen. That's all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much for watching The Owl's Nest. And before you go, make sure you click that bell to subscribe to our channels, get all the notifications on our latest videos. And make sure that you catch the breakdown every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for all the esports and gaming news that you need. Follow Jake OW on Twitter, and Jake_OW on Twitch and YouTube. And until next time, stay on that payload.